everyone, and welcome to the first episode of Season 2 of the Beyond Conflict podcast. I'm your host, Tom Wright. We have a very special episode lined up for you guys today. My co-hosts Abby, Oswald and myself are joined by a very special guest, Sir Terry Waite. It was an absolute honour to be joined by Sir Terry for this episode. If you're not too familiar with Sir Terry yourself, here's a little bit of background on him. He's an author, humanitarian and former hostage negotiator who was taken captive and held in solitary confinement. His story is absolutely incredible and extremely inspiring. Now, without wasting any more time, on to the interview. Today, we are joined by Sir Terry. Sir Terry, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to speak to us. We really appreciate it, and we're looking forward to hearing what you have to say.
Oh, thanks, Tom. Thanks for your welcome. It's a pleasure to be with you on a lovely sunny day.
Yes, on a lovely Friday afternoon, the British sun is finally back, and we can all.
If things were a little bit sunnier in the international climate, we'd all feel much better. But I'm afraid things are not very good at the moment, are they?
No, not at the moment. So hopefully they will start to match the weather soon. I thought I'd just jump sort of straight into it. Why did you support the work of Beyond Conflict and decide to become an ambassador? And what does that sort of entail, that role?
It's a longish story, but war is terrible for all people. But often those who suffer the most are women and children. And when a war ceases and the combatants return to their barracks, casualties are left behind. And those casualties are often within the civilian population. Remember in Kosovo, it was after the war was over, and yet the casualties were still there. I remember one young boy, and I heard his story. He was the only survivor in his family. Armed men came into the room where all the family were gathered. He hid under a table, and every other member of that family was killed. When I met the boy, he couldn't speak. He was so traumatized. It enabled me to give my support to the setting up of a whole series of clinics across Kosovo, where we took local people, mainly ladies, mainly girls. They got special training over in this country, and then they went back specifically to work in the area of trauma, and particularly with mothers and children. And that boy did well. He improved. But the scars are there for life. You can get over trauma, but the scars remain. As I say, they are often the forgotten ones when a war is finished and combatants have gone home. They're often the forgotten ones. Anything that can be done by any organization to give support, deal professionally where possible with trauma and all the other problems is to be applauded.
Definitely. I think it's such an important thing to help people cope with trauma, and anything of that nature is definitely very impactful to them.
My question is a little bit more challenging. So your capture occurred whilst you were working to release American hostages. Looking back, on the experience, do you ever feel any sense of regret or anything for helping them, which obviously led to the capture?
I've been engaged in hostage negotiation for many, many years. I don't do it now. I'm getting a bit old for it now. But I did it for many years. First of all, in Iran, when I got a number of people out of the Evin prison, which is a big prison in the center of Iran, Libya with Gaddafi, and then later on in Lebanon, not just for Americans, but for people of different nationalities, British, American, and so on. Now, if you engage in the work of hostage negotiating, you have to face reality. And the reality is that you might either be killed or captured. Take what precautions you can, but you know this is always a problem. I was fortunate for many years. I wasn't killed, obviously not, but I was eventually, but I was captured.
Yeah.
And I spent 5 years, as you know, in very strict solitary confinement, chained to the wall in a dark room with no books and papers for well over 3 years, 4 years, and no companionship And I didn't see anybody for 5 years because I had to pull a blindfold over my eyes. Looking back on that experience, this is directly now answering your question. I wouldn't obviously want to go through that again, but it wasn't all negative.
Yeah.
A hard experience in life need not be totally negative. And let me say why. Because I had an opportunity. I had nothing to read, nothing at all apart from what I had in my mind. Throughout life, I'd been a reader. I'd read very widely. And so I had a store of memories of reading of books in my head. And I began to write in my head. I'd never written before. I began to write poetry. Subsequently, I published a book of poetry. But I never liked poetry at one time. I used to get fed up with it at school. I asked myself, why would you write poetry? And my own theory is, and it's just a theory of mine, it may be wrong, poetry is using language in a harmonious way. That's one definition of it. Using words and language to create harmony. You're trying to create harmony within yourself, trying to keep yourself together. And it's vitally important to keep your mind alive. I discovered I had a gift for writing. Subsequently, I've written, I think, 7 books, which I would never have done without being in captivity. The second thing is you become very introspective in captivity. You know, when you're alone particularly, and you begin to think of all the things that you've done wrong in the past, because nobody's perfect.
Yeah.
We've all made mistakes and done stupid things, which I have. Somehow you've got to be able to recognize that all human beings are a complex mixture of, one might say, light and dark, good and evil, whatever you wish to use. And somehow it's a question of finding that balance, not being over-depressed by your mistakes, but be determined not to make them again and to move on beyond them. So I was able to have a really searching examination of myself, which has been very useful because I began to know myself in a way that I didn't know myself prior to captivity.
Yeah.
And the third and final thing is, when I came out, I had a fellowship in Cambridge, first of all, but then after that, I decided that I would not take a salaried job. I'd always had a salaried job, but I'd give my time away to various causes that I found were important, namely the homeless, with hostages. I helped found Hostage International, which you can look on the web, which is an organization that supports hostages and hostage families, and Emmaus for the Homeless, which is an organization where people who've been at the extreme end of homelessness, and often in drugs, prison sentences, come and get back into life. Now, I don't think I'd ever been able to do that had I not been through the experience. I discovered that when I talk to people who've been, let's say, in a very hard situation, either a hostage or a prisoner or whatever, there's an immediate understanding because they say, you know what it's like. You're not just talking from a textbook. You understand. So looking back, I wouldn't wish to do it again, but no regret.
That's incredible. So you said that you didn't have any paper or pen, did you, when you were in captivity?
No paper, no. No pen or pencil, no pen or paper.
Wow.
I did get books after about 3.5 to 4 years.
Wow.
But up to that time, I had nothing. I never got pencil and paper. No.
Can you remember what you wrote your poems about?
I published some of them in a book called Out of the Silence.
So you remember them for 5 years?
I remembered some of them, but then poems came to mind later. The genesis of them, had been in captivity, and then they were developed at a later stage. I don't think it's necessarily very good poetry, but it's an expression of it's an expression of feeling. Poetry is such a complex area. Some people love it, some people hate it. Most people hate it.
Hate it when you're in school, and then I think you find some beauty in it when you're older, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah. What was your favourite thing that you wrote then?
I wrote a little poem on peace. I don't know if you've heard of the composer, Carl Jenkins. He wrote The Armed Man and The Peacemakers. He wrote to me, he said, I'm writing a work on peace, the peacemakers. He said, will you contribute? I forgot all about it. And then one afternoon I suddenly remembered. And I wrote almost immediately a little poem on peace. Now, don't ask me to repeat it because I can't remember the words of it. But I wrote it, and he incorporated it in the work, and it was set to music within the whole work, Peacemakers. I remember going to the inaugural concert, the inaugural performance, which was in the Royal Festival Hall, to hear my own words, sung by Lucy Crowe, the soprano. That was quite something.
Yeah, that must have been very emotional.
The poetry couldn't have been all that bad.
I think it was probably very good. I'll have to look at it.
Yeah. I just wanted to tie into the start of Abby's question when she mentioned you're a hostage negotiator. So how did you become a hostage negotiator? Because it's not this sort of typical role you hear about or like a path you really come across.
Few and far between. And many of them, many hostage negotiators are working for private firms and working for a fee. Of course, there is what is known as hostage insurance. And then if one of their employees is taken, then they can call on this insurance and get some professional to do negotiation. There are two types of hostage taking. They're both criminal activities, that makes no doubt. But there's political hostage taking and criminal hostage taking. Now, political hostage taking is where a group of people or one individual or several individuals will take a hostage and use that hostage as a bargaining chip to gain political advantage for themselves. Criminal hostage taking is where a hostage or hostages are taken and ransom money is demanded. Now, the two are both criminal activities, but they're divided that way for clarity, because the way in which you would negotiate in a criminal case would be very different than the way you would negotiate in a political case. All my experience has been in political cases. I've never got into the business of paying money for the release of hostages. I've always worked in the political area trying to resolve some very complex and difficult problems.
Very interesting. Like, I couldn't imagine how you'd even sort of go about doing that initially.
I was working at the time as an advisor. I'm a layman, by the way. I'm not a clergyman. I was working as advisor to the then Archbishop of Canterbury, Robert Ramsden. I got involved in those days because the families of people who'd been captured came to Lambeth Palace and they said they were desperate. They had no one to help them. They got some advice, but not much. And could I help them? And I've always believed that if anybody turns to the church for help, regardless of whether they have faith or not, that's not the important point. They're people in distress. And if the church can do anything to support them or to help them, it ought to. I agreed to help them. And that's how I got started in that way. Although it does go back before that, because as a younger man, I lived in Uganda. And I was when Uganda at the time of the coup. Uganda had a coup. The dictator that took over was General Idi Amin, whom you may or may not have heard of. I negotiated with him for the release of hostages. This is long before I joined the Archbishop's staff. In those days, there was no special training or no special equipment. You just had to get on with it. And I had to learn as I went along, I suppose. The great secret is to try and listen to people, to try and understand why they're behaving as they're behaving, to get to the root of the issue, because they don't take, in political cases or in criminal cases, you can understand in criminal cases why they're doing what they're doing because they want money. In political cases, it's very different. The motives are different. And you have to try and get to the real root of the issue and somehow try and deal with it. In some cases, it's possible. In some cases, it's not possible.
Is there a specific motive that someone had when you were in hostage negotiation that shocked you or was memorable?
No, I think you have to take each situation that comes up. You have to be very, very adaptable. You have to suffer all sorts of ups and downs and disappointments. In those days, I was working alone. I would never recommend that. I mean, I was working alone because we just didn't have the resources to work as a team. Now, that puts you under tremendous pressure. For instance, when you're in a foreign country, you're by yourself and you're negotiating at the top level with people like Colonel Gaddafi, you don't ring back home because you know that telephone lines and communications will be listened to. You've got to take decisions on the spot by yourself and stand by them. And if you make a wrong decision, then you pay a price for that. So it is a lonely, demanding job. As I say, looking back on it, I sometimes wonder how I survived. But somehow I did. I survived, and I'm still around. As you can see.
Yeah.
Must be such an intense situation to be in. There must not be anything like it, really.
It's not an easy situation. And also then, in the early days, I had to get the hostages and bring them home by civilian aircraft. And many of them, were traumatized, and sometimes they'd fallen into mental problems. It was a nightmare getting them back. And this is why, one of the reasons why, I decided that something needed to be done to take care of returning hostages and to take care of their families when the person, or if a person is taken hostage from that family. And so I set up Hostage International, which today is at work in Canada, America, New Zealand, all over the world. And we have staff, and we have a small central team here in England, and a lot of volunteers who work with us. That came, as I said earlier, as a result of my own experience, drawing on that experience and giving for it.
Sir Terry, what was going through your mind when you were held in captivity?
Many things went through my mind. One of the things is I had a family. I still have a family. I mean, a wife and 4 children. And one of the things that worried me more than anything else was I wondered if, because of my actions and my absence from them, at that time they were coming up to university level and so on, whether or not my actions had really harmed them. That was my big worry. Fortunately, it didn't. One has to recognize, really, children are often more resilient than sometimes we give them credit for. They are resilient and they can face the most dreadful situations. Doesn't mean to say that some are not marked by that. Of course they are. That was a concern. And what I had to do, and this may sound very strange, is I had to put my family almost out of my mind. Now, I spend time talking with hostages now. I'm currently talking to one hostage is allowed to have a telephone conversation with me every week. He's in arbitrary detention, which is a different form of hostage taking. What that really means in his case is that he was sent out by his company to resolve a financial dispute. The country to which he was sent, I won't mention it, detained him and said, we will not release him until the debt is paid. That's arbitrary detention, really. But the point of the story is this individual has frequent contact with his family. And of course, the family are going through difficulties. And this is an added worry to him because he's so frustrated, he can do nothing about it. It was much better for me to know nothing, to be isolated and to put the family to the back of my mind. Doesn't mean to say I didn't care for them. Doesn't mean to say I didn't love them, of course. But I had to put them in the back of my mind for my own sanity's sake, to try and keep myself together mentally.
Must have been an extremely tough situation to be in, especially with your family back home. I couldn't imagine how hard that must have been.
Do you have a positive thought that kept you going through it? Like, was there one thing that motivated you to keep living and keep waking up every day?
One of the things you have to do in a situation like that, and I think you have to do it in many situations in life, not just in captivity, but in life. Take each day as it comes. That doesn't mean to say don't make plans for the future. Of course, if you can make plans for the future, good. But live each day as fully as possible. So many people just do not do that. They're always living for tomorrow. Oh, it'll be fine tomorrow when I can do A, B, and C.
Yeah.
Now is your life, this moment. When you meet people, be fully with people, be there for them, be in the moment, in the present, in the now, rather than dreaming and living in the future and living in the past. Now, that's something that I had to learn. I had a mock execution. I was beaten in captivity. A very unpleasant thing. I had to cope with that and just learn and say, I still have my life. You haven't taken that, and there's a part of me, my soul, which you will not take, or which is mine. You will not take it. You can destroy my body, but you will not destroy me completely. It's that sort of philosophy that enables you in situations of difficulty to survive. Many people have to do that, people who've been terminally ill or whatever. I said at the beginning, I wish the world were a sunnier place at the moment. We seem to have conflict and aggression everywhere. People often ask me, well, what can we do about it? What can we do? My response to that is, often we can't intervene. We're not politicians. We can't intervene at the high political level.
Yeah.
But we can act within our own area of influence. Where you have influence, where you have possibilities, act positively in that area. So, for example, by acting positively to support children who've been traumatized in war, it's a positive action. And cumulative positive actions can bring about change. If more people could take that attitude and don't think because it's only a small thing, it isn't important. It is important. The small things are important. Just a small act of kindness, the small act of compassion, the small act of caring, the small act of thinking beyond your own boundaries and thinking and putting yourself in the shoes of somebody else. That's another thing we really need to do, to put ourselves in the position of those who are less fortunate and say, I often think, when I go to a strange or new town in a winter's night when it's raining, I often think, good heavens, what would I do if I was sleeping in a doorway? I'd be absolutely frozen and fed up, which again led me to get moving with doing something about the homeless. So act within your own area of influence.
That's beautiful. That's such a good mindset to carry through life that I think is unfortunately being forgotten by a lot of people.
What's the biggest change you would like to see in 2025?
Greater emphasis on diplomacy on the international stage at the highest level. I'm afraid that we're too quick to fall to aggression. I mean, we are spending billions and billions of pounds and dollars or whatever on arms. I'd like to be a pacifist. I'm not a pacifist for the simple reason that I believe in certain situations it is necessary for there to be a defense, if I put it like that, not until every other option has been tried. And so often people fall into warfare and aggression before options are even looked at, never mind tried. I'd like to see statesmen also whom I could respect. I feel, well, who am I to judge? But I'm just giving you my personal feeling. I feel that we seem to be in an age right across the world when we lack statesmen. We don't have statesmen, and women, of course. I'm using that term broadly, statesmen and women, who can bring a mature understanding and a compassionate and wise understanding to the complex problems that they have to face. And I think there's an absence of such people today.
It does feel like everybody sort of goes from 0 to 100 so quickly nowadays in every facet of life, not just globally, just, even sort of day to day, just regular interactions.
I think, Tom, I would like in our educational system, and that is to enable people to think critically, not to just accept what they read or what they see in the press or on television, to think critically. We've got a situation now where people follow the herd. The herd instinct is still very strong. We see that in many countries around the world. We see it in America at the moment. The herd following Donald Trump. For how long? Who knows? I'd like people to think critically and to really have that ability. I fear our education system is not necessarily fulfilling that as it ought to fulfill that. It ought to be dealing much more with that. Also, I regret the fact that the arts are being played down very much in school curriculum. And that to me is a great loss, because we need to balance the two sides of the brain, the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere. The left hemisphere of the brain being the area of computerization, if you like, of calculation and so on. The right area being the area of imagination and creativity. And the emphasis in education and learning of facts is left hemisphere stuff. The right hemisphere is the balance. I fear that there's a danger in our educational system of becoming out of balance. If I've got 3 precepts for living, I would say this: try to live in harmony with yourself. Get to know yourself and live in harmony with your neighbor, and try and be in harmony with the environment, because we're part of this greater environment. It's so important that we try and do that. We won't always succeed, but if we can try and be in harmony with ourselves, with our neighbor, with our environment, then I think we are at least making some progress.
Agreed.
Especially what you said about the education system and allowing creativity to sort of be a bit more free, I think is definitely, for me personally, is something that's really important. There's, I did much better in school at the more like creative things. I can't just read a book and remember everything. So,
Massive overhaul. Yeah.
yeah. So, sort of like the arts and media and all that sort of stuff at school that sort of really helped me. And then it sort of led me down the career path I've ended up down. So, I think definitely allowing people to express themselves and be outside of the box and think outside of the box and opening everybody up to that discussion, I think is something that's extremely important, especially to establish at that early age as well, because it just gives you the confidence.
Okay, well, I shall have to conclude there because I've got another engagement coming up. So I hope I'm not cutting you too short. I've tried to answer your questions as fully as I can, given my limited ability. And
No, you've done
brilliant. Thank you for speaking to us.
Thank you.
I hope we might meet face to face at some point in the future. Who knows?
Yes, I hope so too.
Yes,
Okay.
that'd be amazing. Thank you again to Sir Terry for joining us for this episode. If you are interested in learning more about Sir Terry Waite, all of his links will be available in the description down below. Please, if you are able to donate to Beyond Conflict, that'll be greatly appreciated. The links to our website will be available in the description down below, and the money will go towards some fantastic causes. If you did enjoy this episode, please remember to like, comment and share it, as well as rate us 5 stars on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next episode.